Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in this one, I will be giving my final beta Shadowlands tier list update because Shadowlands is coming out literally in a couple of days. So if you're interested to see how I think your spec is performing in 3v3 arena, PvP, in Shadowlands, if you're worried about trying to pick a main and you want to know if something's performing well or underperforming, I can give you my best well-informed opinion, having watched content creators, played World of Warcraft since its creation, inception, been Gladiator, multi-rank 1, tournament competitor, commentator. I've been involved with this game a lot. I've seen pretty much everything that this game has to offer, the trends and patterns as well in terms of buffing and nerfing and expectations. So I feel like I can give you a really good assessment overall of what to expect from these specializations. Do note that I will be ranking these specializations only against themselves. And I will be discussing the meta and where these specs fit in the meta, and that may change your opinion on, oh, it was S tier, but he said this about it. So you really want to just, the commentary matters a lot more than the ranking if you're just jumping into the video. But let's start off with Affliction Warlock. This is a very well anticipated spec. It got a lot of abilities returned to it with Demonic Circle, a lot of its utility curses. So if you're interested in the rot playstyle of Affliction Warlock, it's doing a lot of damage. It had a lot of that cool, unique utility returned to it. It's a very fun spec in my mind. But this tier list is for performance. So how is it performing? It's doing a lot of damage. I think it is susceptible to getting taken down by setup melee cleaves. Anything with like a Windwalker, anything that can isolate the Warlock and burst it down. But in the hands of a very skilled player, I think that you're going to absolutely wreck with this specialization. However, that is a little bit further into the start of the expansion. On the beta, we're testing it with 213 item level. And when the game releases, you're not going to be 213 item level. So your haste is going to be pretty slow. It may feel like your global cooldown capped, hard to get damage out while avoiding damage because of this. So this is my assessment of the 213 item level, which you will get, assuming you're playing at a decent rating and collecting gear throughout the season. So later on in the season, I think that it'll return to this. But at the start, you may struggle a little bit. I think it's very important that you play with things like warriors or shadow priests so that there's a priority, or mages. So there's a priority other than yourself. And with a warrior, the warrior will protect you and just do a ton of damage and slaughter people that are trying to chase you around. So I think it is a little bit comp dependent in terms of its overall viability. I think for Affliction, I don't think I can give it an S tier ranking. I don't think that it's completely out of this world because it has a few weaknesses, but I think the weaknesses are justifiable to the play style, and I think it adds into the gameplay while you're trying to avoid taking damage and maximize your damage at the same time. For me, it's an above average spec. I think that it will be a good pick overall, but you're likely going to see the real power of it more further into the first season. Arcane Mage, again, it's a mage specialization. You're going to synergize really well with subtlety rogues, and you really can't go wrong, right? Like Rogue Mage has been a staple for a long time, and it seems like it's still going to be. Assassination is still a great option, solid pick. Even Outlaw can work, as well as Subtlety if Subtlety were to get nerfed. So as an Arcane Mage, you're really never going to not have an option to play Rogue Mage if you're interested in running that type of composition. I think for spellcasting cleaves, elemental shamans, even destruction warlocks, affliction warlock, these wizard cleave metas, I think that you'll fit decently well into them. Having lost displacement, so the ability to jump back for alter time, was a nerf in terms of your mobility. So you may struggle a bit in terms of avoiding damage comparatively to the past iterations of Arcane, and you're still limited to one school of magic. You can go towards Venthyr and get Mirrors of Torment for the Shadow School, which I would personally recommend, and I think a lot of other Arcane mages are recommending Venthyr as the Covenant. But overall, what do I think of it? Because it can play with rogues, and you're going to be able to run Rogue Mage, and I think that comp is going to do phenomenally well. As a standalone, is it better than Affliction? I think it's probably about the same. I think I feel safe putting Arcane on the same tier as Affliction. It's above average. You have access to some of the staple best compositions in the game, even as Arcane, and Arcane is still performing well. You're a little bit limited to your cooldown damage, but again, that works really well for Rogue Mage. Beast Mastery Hunter, this is a spec that unfortunately has the problem of doing really well in PvE, so it receives nerfs and it's not really good in PvP. On top of that, it's a pretty straightforward, easy to pick up specialization myself personally in PvP. So if you just want something that's kind of casual, get in there, get something done, not really looking to be super competitive, I think it's a good pick. But in terms of its overall performance, I think you're gonna really struggle with it, and I think that I'm gonna have to put it on the bottom in terms of performance. I think that as marksman being as good as it is and survival as being as good as it is, that performance wise you're making a pretty big mistake running beast mastery. While I think you can make it work and it's good pick up and play spec, performance wise it's definitely lacking. And you got the downside of pets being very easy to kill at the moment, and you're 100% dependent on your pet. So big downsides for beast mastery. Haven't seen a lot of any sort of honor talent buffs or anything to really make me think otherwise. So D tier is where the beast mastery hunter is currently lying. Balanced druid, I've got my own personal biases to this spec because I want the damage to be more allocated in the casted spells during eclipse and the dot damage, which it just currently isn't. But its power level, because of how hard Star Surge hits, has to be recognized. While I'm personally not a fan of the gameplay that it currently has, with the Kyrian Covenant buffing your damage and the modifiers towards your Star Surge to hit really big Star Surge numbers, you're going to be able to win games with it. And I think it will be a good specialization because it has instant crowd control paired up with that on-demand instant cast burst damage. I think spell cleaves with elemental shamans are going to be your go-to. You may notice the power of this specialization as well as the season goes on, because not having haste, a lot of these casters are going to feel really slow and sluggish right off the bat when you're at 170 item level, maybe just bordering 190 item level. I think our haste is going to be really low and they're going to feel slow. So this is more or less like when we advance through the season, I think that balanced druid will be competitive. You're probably going to be seeing a lot of Ellie boomkin, maybe some shadow boomkin, potentially warlock boomkin. I would like to see that, but I think the hybrids are going to be a little bit more important to stack up with the balanced druid, and having stun locks to synergize with the mass root, potential for rogue synergies as well. So for me, I think Moonkin in terms of competition right now is about an A. You're going to be able to have instant crowd controls, good utility, hands of a good player. You're going to be able to perform well. But again, my personal bias is that I think that what is causing it to do well, which is really hard hitting Star Surge, is probably going to get nerfed. Or it's something that in the past I've seen trends where stuff like that gets nerfed in PvP, and a lot of people are screenshotting it like, oh my god, look at this Star Surge, and we all know what happened to Frost Mages when people started doing that. So be a bit hesitant with it, and that's why I say the commentary is important here. But right now it's an A, performance wise. Demonology Warlock, I think it's doing a little bit better than I had initially assessed, and I've seen a couple of players playing it. I don't think it's as good as Affliction, and I definitely don't think it's as good as Destruction, but you can make it work. And I think you can make it work a lot better than Beast Mastery in terms of competition. You can play with Elemental Shamans, play with Warriors, Spell Cleaves, kind of standard play like that. You're pretty durable. Main downside is your pet getting killed, and Warlocks also have long pet reses outside of their Fell Domination, which is quite a long cooldown. So you may have some downsides of teams targeting your pet at a competitive level. Its damage is a little bit hard to get going. It takes a long time. It's really easy to see coming because there's a ton of imps on the ground and you got this giant demonic tyrant, so it's a bit predictable, and outside of that window you're not really doing a lot. So for me, Demonology, I wouldn't say that I think it's a solid spec in terms of competitive, like pushing for Gladiator, but it's definitely better than Beast Mastery. Just having utility like Spam Fear is always going to give you the option to outplay people more than Beast Mastery has available to it. So I think Demonology falling on the C tier for me at the moment. Destruction Warlock, this is a spec I think people are sleeping on. It's doing really good, and it's got all the advantages of multiple schools of magic, hard-hitting Chaos Bolts, ramping up Infernals with Rain of Fire. I mean, this thing, it didn't go anywhere. Like, we were talking about Fire Mages losing Greater Pyro, and now BFA is over, and now it's Reign of Affliction Warlocks, and oh my god, Shadow Priest rework, but Destruction didn't go anywhere. I think that it's still a really good spec overall. I struggle to put it on the S tier, mostly because I think the meta is going to be this heavy hybrid melee cleaves that are going to be able to just dampen the Destruction Warlocks, and then kind of overrun them with crowd control, but I think it is above average, and B is kind of average, solid spec overall for performance and competition. So I'm struggling a bit to put it on the S tier, but if you're worried about like, oh, everyone's talking about Affliction and I'm worried about picking Destruction because of that, you shouldn't be worried. If you're a main Destruction Warlock, you're going to do great. It's still in a really good spot. For me, I think performance-wise, A tier is a suitable position. Now, Elemental Shaman, this is a spec that recently has just been coming out of nowhere for me. The amount of damage that Lava Burst is doing, Stormkeeper is doing, this thing just pumps all the time. It's not limited by the same restrictions as the other specs on the A tier. Its damage is easier to ramp up. And if you're running Necrolord Covenant, you'll get access to getting multiple Flame Shocks out. So for me, Elemental Shaman, actually, I think it's going to be going up into S tier. I think it's a caster that can deal with melee pretty well as well. Which is going to be a pretty melee heavy meta. And I think it synergizes with a lot of classes like mages and shadow priests really effectively. I think it's a very versatile spec. It's doing tremendous burst damage. Like, I mean, and it's kind of getting slept on. Like, I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but every time I see an elemental shaman, every time they're decimating. And it looks like a lot of fun too. On top of that, it's a super fun spec. I think for me, elemental is jumping up into the S tier. With my assessment for the beta at the moment. I think it's going to be one of the best casters. Now, Fire Mage lost Greater Pyro, but you're still a mage and you can still play Rogue Mage. And I've seen a lot of Rogue Mages doing a lot of damage. I'm starting to see that mages are tilting towards Night Fae as a covenant, especially for fire, because you can reduce the cooldown of your combustion, and Kyrian received quite a bit of nerfs recently. And being able to reduce your cooldowns to synergize more up with your subtlety rogue and catch the other team off guard and not have cooldowns to trade, I think is going to make the spec really competitive. But it's really dependent on cooldowns. Like really dependent on cooldowns to be able to get burst damage, but it's synergy with a rogue, multi-school of magic with arcane, fire. I think that it's as competitive as Arcane. I don't think that it's falling dramatically as far behind as I initially had assessed. Having seen it perform in a few compositions, I feel good putting it on A. I think that it is in a good position. Frost Mage, this is a spec that I would have put on S tier. But it received a couple of nerfs recently, which is making me second guess it a little bit. I also don't know about putting everything on A tier. I'm thinking about what do I need to do to make something that I think something's actually going to be B tier. Maybe considering the meta, it's going to be melee cleave heavy. Is Frost going to be better than Fire? I think Frost does well into melee cleave meta, and it's still doing good damage. It's still mostly coming from Ice Lance, even though Ice Lance received all of the nerfs. Kyrian getting nerfed makes it a little bit tough as far as covenants. Venthyr might end up just being good for interrupt reductions and Mirrors of Torment. Maybe even potentially Night Fae. There's a Soulbind Conduit to get a charge stun from stealth for Night Fae, so mages can charge stun with their Vulpin form and then get a polymorph on their own, which could be a lot of fun, but it's still a little bit more of a gimmick point. This is just my assessment for performance. How is Frost Mage doing? I think undeniably Frost Mage is going to do really well in spellcaster cleaves like Ellie, Shadow, and you can play with subtlety rogues, and all of those specs are really good, and you're going to be desirable because of your spam crowd control. I think that it's above average. I don't think that it's S tier anymore now that its instant damage has been nerfed a few times. If that hadn't have happened, I would have said that it was an S tier specialization, but I think it's above average, and B is the average line. Now, Hunter is my most problematic pick at the moment, because what I'm worried about is that this hybrid meta where the off healing is so high that it's not going to be able to kill the target before its crowd control is over. And if it can't, it's not going to kill anything. If the PvE trinkets weren't removed and subtlety rogues were getting all this cheesy damage that they were getting on top of the hunter, sure, it's going to win every single game. But I don't know if that's ultimately going to be the case. I've actually been second guessing the performance of Marksmanship Hunter overall because it's so stationary and you can get tunneled down, and you're going to likely want to play with subtlety rogues and warriors. But would the subtlety rogue rather be playing with something else, right? Would the warrior rather be playing with something else? What else do you bring to the table? You're not bringing Word of Glories, you're not bringing healing surges, you're not bringing spam crowd control, your damage is casted. I am a bit worried for it. I don't think that I could say Marksmanship is above average anymore, based on how the meta is moving forward. I think that it's a solid spec. It's not doing badly by all means, and you still have insane damage from the opener. But if you're not getting kills with it, I'm worried you will fall off and start to struggle and get rotted down by the Affliction, Shadow Priest, and the Boomkin burst damage and fall a bit behind. So I don't think that you're above average, and I think you're actually falling more in just like a solid spec overall at the moment. So that was like a big choice for me for Marksmanship, because I think a lot of people are expecting like this thing's going to be insane. I think that it still has its limitations, and a lot of other specs are starting to shine a lot more. So I think it's solid, but not an overachiever. Shadow Priest, the final one. This one also got quite a few nerfs recently. And it's a spec that I'm worried about because of the melee cleave meta. I think it might have a problem surviving through these enhancement shamans and these warriors kind of just running it down and spam interrupting it. And it's really annoying at the moment to deal with an honor talent called Overwatch from warriors. So if they intervene a target, it puts spell reflect up, and that spell reflect lasts 5 seconds. So you're just kind of stuck there for 5 seconds, not able to dot anything or do any damage. So I'm a bit worried about it in the melee cleave meta and its damage being nerfed. I still think it's super competitive. It's just the main debate for it is it still an S tier specialization, because that's where I had initially assessed it. I think it's synergy with Elemental, and it's synergy with Subtlety, and it's synergy with Arms Warrior, and it's just base utility kit, and its overall damage, despite being nerfed, is still high enough that I feel comfortable putting it as an S tier performer. As Shadow, it's got instant crowd control to set up. It's got the everything that you would need to really excel and perform in PvP, but it was brought down, and maybe because it was brought down, that's why I think Elemental is closer to it and on the same tier at this point. So for me, I think Shadow is going on the S tier, but take this range DPS tier list with the assessment that I think it's going to be a melee meta for a while, because you're going to have low item level, you're going to have low haste, and the melee DPS get these big power bumps from their Covenant abilities that may just kind of run you over at the start. So the power of the range DPS, I think, is going to come online much later into the first season. I'm wondering if it means, if that ends up being the case, which I think it will be, if they'll end up nerfing melee hybrids right as the range DPS are getting all their haste, and then suddenly we see a big pendulum switch, and you'd want to be playing range DPS more than melee DPS. But for the most part, I think a lot of specs like Shadow and Affliction had all of the attention, right? And we were all eyes on them. Rework, is Affliction back? I feel like a lot of the community was just paying attention to them. And then we sort of just forgot, like, oh, mages and GPI got removed, Sapphire's bad. And we were really focused on just like the new reworks and stuff. I think all 3 mage specs are going to do great, and you just play with rogues or spell cleaves. And you shouldn't be sleeping too much on them. BM Hunter, easy pick up and play, but probably not super competitive. Demonology, if you really want to, I think it's got one of the deepest kind of keybinds that you're going to need. It's got a lot of abilities if you want to be hipster and try and make it work. But I think like when tournaments come, when you're pushing ratings, people are going to opt more for Affliction or Destruction. And then Marksman, I think its limitations for myself personally drag it below the above average to just, it's a solid spec. But the DPS in the game probably want to play with other specs. Maybe I'll get proven wrong. I mean, Jelly Beans or something, it's probably going to prove me wrong. Be like, oh, you put that there on B tier. But I'm also taking into try and assess, like, what is the average player going to jump in, try and get some performance out of this, push it up on ratings, and how is that experience going to be? And then give you some compositions and some covenants as options. That was the main purpose of the video. So if you like this video, this is my final assessment for the Shadowlands beta in terms of the specializations of range DPS. Like the video if you did, leave a comment down below with your thoughts about the specializations, what covenants, what classes are you looking to play, as this is the big decision we're all going to be making in a couple of days. If you like this type of content, then please hit the subscribe button here, and you'll be updated every time one of these tier list updates is coming out, and see how your spec is performing based on my opinion. And other than that, I'll have links to a couple of other videos as well if you want to check them out and start gathering some information before Shadowlands comes out. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.